Hi, this is Shalimar Steinberg, and in this video I will be discussing the display and setup features of our AutoCAD. So, if you look at the screen, you will see some basic features. We've talked about the fact that there are ribbons available, and each of these ribbons possesses many commands that you'll use. Generally, in any one of these commands, if you look at it, the capital letter will allow you to start typing in a shortcut if you want to. So for example, if I want copy, I can go C, which will first be circle, but then I can go to the next letter O, and that will take me to copy, and then I could hit enter or click on the object that I want. But I can also do it by clicking on these. Now once I have selected something, I will be able to then look at my command line, and it's going to give me directions on what to do next. So for example, for the line command, it says specify the first point. So where on the screen do you want your line to start? And as you can see attached to my cursor, there are two boxes. Those are coordinate points for the X and Y orientations for the object. So the 0, 0 would be at the base here where the X and Y meet. And any amount that I put in either of these boxes would be how far away from that in one direction I want to go. X is always going to be first and then Y, just like in math. And you can hit the tab button to switch between them in order to give your distance. The other thing that you can do if you know that you don't need a specific starting spot on the screen is just to click where you want to start your object. Then the command bar will give you the next command, which is specify the next point. So from that first point, I have the option of saying a specific distance, and then if I hit the tab, I can say the angle at which I want that line to go. So in AutoCAD, 0 is always going to be directly to the right, and then 90 degrees will be directly to the north, 180 will be to the left, and 270 will be down, but it'll also show that as 90. You just know that it's a negative. But you can see there it's saying polar is 270 degrees. So I can then click where I want my next one to go. And I can keep going until I hit the enter key, which will end the command. So I can make as many joined ones as I want to. And then I hit the enter key. Now when I'm in a command, the typical behavior for AutoCAD is that when I hit the right mouse key, it will show me a set of shortcuts that are available. However, I have changed that under the settings. So let's look at the settings for a moment. If I go up to the big A here, I can go to drawing utilities and change some of the settings, such as drawing properties, the units that I specifically want to use. So let's look at that first. Units are going to tell me how the different numbers equate to specific units of measurement. So the default in AutoCAD is to use decimals, and so it's going to give you out of 0.1, 0.2, 0.3 up to 1. And then the default is typically inches. You can change that to any unit that you want to, including millimeters, feet, etc. But typically in AutoCAD we do it in inches. And then if we're doing an architectural drawing, we would switch to architectural type, which would show things in feet and inches fractions. And then if we were doing engineering, we could show it in minutes and seconds and degrees, which is surveyor's units. If you're doing it for the angle, it would be surveyor's units. And we can do it as fractional, which just is going to give us a fraction of an inch, so up to 1/16, etc. Or scientific notation if we're doing things that are really, really small. But typically we're going to stick with decimal to start with, and we're going to leave it on inches. And you can see here the example of what it will look like. Okay, so I'm going to say OK to this. I next have the option to set drawing limits under utilities. So I could go to, that's under options. We'll talk more about the other drawing utilities later. So if I go to options, it's going to open this big display. And the first section is going to be files. So this will allow me to locate specific file types. This is not something that I generally end up messing around with. The next thing is going to be display. So the default display, I believe, is the dark one, which means that this will be black and then have white lettering on it. We can also do the light one, which is what I have right now, which is where it's white with black letters on it. It's your choice, which is easier on your eyes to use. You can resize the ribbon icons to specific sizes, or you can use large buttons for toolbars. You can change the tooltips that you get, things like that. Typically, the only thing that I really change in display is this. You can change display resolutions, but it's going to make things bigger or smaller. It's easier to just change scale. And then you can change the crosshair size on your mouse, which is the little cross that shows when you're selecting things. This works well for me, but for some people a bigger or smaller crosshair is easier to see. You can change how files are opened and saved. You will notice here that I have picked Save As to be the 2013 version. That is because if anyone has an earlier version of AutoCAD and I save as a 2019 file, they will not be able to open it. And so I usually save as one version earlier, and you'll see here that that's the most recent version before 2018. So I could do 2018 as well. But like I said, a lot of people have older versions of AutoCAD, so it's easier to save as an earlier version unless you need something that can only be done in the current version. You can also say how many recently opened files it will show you, and a few other things here. These are the settings for plotting and publishing. We generally control those per file instead of having an overarching, so I just accept the default. System is if you need to change your graphics performance or anything about your actual computer settings as far as AutoCAD goes. Again, the defaults for these are generally pretty functional. User preferences. This is where I can change whether it shows that shortcut when I right-click or not. So I can go to right-click customization, and I could turn off time-sensitive right-click, and I could change this back to shortcut menu. And if I apply that, then I could go here to apply and say OK. And now, when I'm in a command, if I do something and I right-click, it shows me a shortcut menu. So this is useful for people who are just starting out in the program because it gives you some ideas. And it will let you do recent inputs, and it will let you redo your most recent command typically. I am going to change it back to the right-click being just, and you saw that it won't let me do something if I'm in the middle of a command, so I had to end that. Go back to the right-click being just a click of an enter, because that allows me to do things more quickly if I know what I'm doing. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. There are drafting specific settings, so these are for things like auto snaps, which we'll learn about down here as the object snaps, and 3D modeling things. We will not be doing 3D drawing in this class, so it's not something that we're going to mess with, but it is something that you can do in AutoCAD. You can see that it would show you the Z-axis and so forth. Selection. This is a big object as it changes how we select objects on the paper. So you can change the pick box size to be bigger or smaller. I typically leave it as the current size. The grip size is also going to show when I select an object, there will be little blue dots that I can use to move things around if I want to. There's also noun-verb selection. So this controls whether you have to select the object before a command or after the command starts. So if you do noun-verb selection, that means that you select the object first and then perform the command. If you do pick first system variable instead, or unclick this, then you would pick a command and then click on the object that you want it to apply to. Finally, we have profiles. Profiles are designed so that you can make all your settings in these that you like and then save it. And that way, instead of having to reset anything in the classroom where we have the deep freeze computers or on somebody else's classroom, you could simply load this profile on your home computers. The program will stay the same as whatever you set it at, so you're not really going to have to worry about it. If anybody is curious about profiles, please email me and I will make a small video about setting one of those as well. Once I've made the changes that I like, I'm going to say apply and OK. And now I can go on to things in my command. So to show you selection, if I hover over an object that's in the screen area, you will see that it allows me to highlight that object, and then I can click on it with the left click and select it. These are the grips that I was talking about. If you were to click on one, you could then drag it to where you wanted it to be instead. Or you can hit escape to exit out of that. You can also pick the middle one and drag the whole bar up instead of just one end or the other end. You can select more than one at once if you want to be able to move them in different ways altogether. And it's also useful, for example, if I wanted to get rid of all of these, I could now hit the erase button or hit the delete key on my keyboard and it would get rid of everything that I had selected. Down here in the bottom of the screen, we have some other areas of interest. One is the main shortcuts menu, and this is going to move us from model space to paper space. I will talk more about the difference between those. We draw everything in our model space because this space is infinite and we can draw things at their true size and shape. So if I have an object that's 100 feet long, I'm going to draw it 100 feet long, and it will be in the computer, and then I can just zoom in or out in order to see it on the screen correctly. Paper space is in these two layout tabs, and this allows us to scale something so that it would fit on a specific size of paper that we're going to print out at. So this tells you whether you're in model space or paper space. We then have the grid in the background here, and you can turn that off or turn it on. If it's highlighted blue, it's on. If it's just white, it's off. And that grid can be used to snap to if you turn on the snap mode. And so you can set that grid to be a specific distance between each block on it, and then use that as something to help you with measurements if you want to. If I snap that mode on or off, then you'll see that when I go into the line command, it's now kind of giving me a little jog to those corner points for each of the blocks in order to make it easier for me to use those. We have ortho mode. Ortho mode is going to restrict your drawing so that you can only draw horizontal or vertical lines. It's not going to allow you to do diagonals and things like that. This can be useful if you're doing something that's very blocky because it makes sure that you don't have to type the amount of degrees for angles. It just automatically assumes it's either 0, 90, 180, or 270. Then next to that we have polar tracking. This allows us to create specific angles that we want to use the most frequently, and I can choose those, and then when I am doing an object, so for example if I choose 30, when I am drawing a line I can go in here and you'll see that it kind of jogs me to each 30-degree increment in order to make it easy for me to do those. So if you're doing something that has a lot of different angles of very specific measurements, you can choose those, or you can choose a custom one. You can set your own. And that would be through this little arrow next to the side. You could pick tracking settings and change it. This one is for isometric drafting, which is a way of making two-dimensional objects appear three-dimensional. We will get into that later in the term, so I'm going to leave it for now. Next we have object snap tracking, and this makes it so that, for example, if I have drawn something and I then want to connect other things to it, if I have object snap tracking turned on, it's going to give me access to these various things that I can say. So I can tell it by checking it to always show me the endpoint of a drawing. And what this does is allow me to snap exactly to the endpoint and not to just where the endpoint appears. Because if I snap exactly to the endpoint, I know that it's attached for sure. But if I snap to what appears to be the endpoint to me, without that green box, for example, like maybe that, if I zoom in, maybe that looks like I'm on the endpoint to me. So I snap here, or I draw from there, you can see it's not actually attached. And you'd have to zoom in really closely to see that it's not completely attached. So there are object snaps for a bunch of different areas on our objects that we can attach to, and I will go through all of those with us starting later on in the week. These are annotation objects, so you can tell it whether to show your scales and text and things or not. This is for the scale of the current view. In model space, it should always be 1:1. In paper space, we will change it to fit it on paper sometimes. This allows you to switch between workspaces, and then this tells you if annotations are on or off, and lets you isolate objects, etc. And you can change system variables or monitor system variables, and you can clear the entire screen if you want to. Okay, so those are the most frequently used things. Oh, and then up here, you can have multiple drawings open at once. Each one will be a separate tab here. So I could go back to the Start tab and click on this, or I could go here, and this is the current drawing I'm working on. Once I've saved it, it will show the name that I give the file. All right, thank you for your attention.